And we
Oh,
are rolling. And our guest is Kate Gladstone. With us also is Julia Hanna. And Kate has a new book, Read Cursive Fast, and it's just
yes.
come out. So
Yeah,
welcome,
actually,
Kate.
yeah. Came out, very, very recently, actually right at the end of April. And at the moment I've been sitting home basically writing envelopes in order to fill pre-orders and those who have requested in writing autographed copies. I
So
don't
let me ask you this, Kate. Are you using cursive to write the
Well, it
addresses?
depends on what one calls cursive. This is the one that I'm just in the process of addressing. Have yet to look up the zip plus 4. Now, if you're going to define cursive as connecting every single letter and using forms which disagree with print, then this is not cursive. And I would have been yelled at by my third grade teacher so bad if I had ever even heard of this, probably worse than I was yelled at for just writing illegibly. However, if you look at what the word cursive has meant throughout history, it comes from a root that just means running or flowing. And the first handwriting models that were ever devised and called cursive were what we would think of as a semi-joined printing, or even calligraphy. So this is actually the case in many countries today. If you look at a lot of UK or other English speaking country or European models of handwriting that are called cursive, or that are called by whatever word in the local language gets translated as cursive when it's translated into English, you do not typically find the North American conventional cursive being used, even if it was used in some of those countries at some time. In fact, one of the more fun things about being a handwriting expert on the internet is that I have sometimes had to mediate arguments between UK and USA specialists. If UK handwriting teachers were complaining about how hard and awful it was to teach cursive and use it, and people from the UK or from some of the Scandinavian countries or from Australia or from New Zealand were saying, but what's the problem? You just take letters and you have occasional joins. And the English teachers in the USA would say, are you out of your mind? While the ones from England and Australia and New Zealand and from other countries who might be writing in English, even if it was not their main language, are saying, are you out of your mind? Now, my notion is that a cursive, which is very obviously related to printing, is generally easy to read. However, like it or not, the conventional cursive of North America, and I'm saying the USA and Canada and to some extent Mexico, by which I mean to some extent is that cursive gets taught in private schools, but not in public ones. And there's a little bit of a story behind that. Well, they would say, no, cursive is this other difficult thing, and you've got to read it. And someone might say, well, what's the problem? You learn to read cursive by writing it. The problem is, realistically, a lot of people are not going to write cursive. Even if they've had it in school, it is not something that one naturally keeps up with in a society where most of the writing we see and most of the writing we do, even if it's by hand, is not in cursive. In fact, there was an investigative report in 2013 by the Toronto Star, and I will probably send you the link after the broadcast if you like, that looked at college first year students, freshmen. Some of these were from provinces, equivalent to states, where cursive had been mandated from the second or third grade on, just as it is in about just under half of USA states. Some of them were from states where cursive had not been mandated for literally decades, or where mandates had not been enforced. Again, very parallel to the situation here. And they looked at how well these people could read cursive, and they found that the ones who'd been through years of mandated cursive in schools were not able to read and cursive any better than the ones who had never, had it, maybe never even seen it. In other words, zilch. In other words, they would look at, they would look at cursive, and it would be a puzzle to them, just so many hieroglyphs. Now, the consequences practically are interesting and should be a warning for anyone who wants to mandate cursive at present in, let's say, the US. Number one, you have a situation where people at age 18, can you hang on? It looks as if I have a package. I have to deal with this as no one else is available.
Okay.
As my husband is doing our taxes, and I probably have to sign for this. Can you hang on?
Sure.
Hey, hello. Just a minute. Okay. Where do I have to sign?
Well, I hope she signs in something similar to cursive. What do you think?
I think she'll sign in her very nice.
Honey, the books have arrived.
I like her skirt.
Sweetheart, I can leave them right here. You do me the great favor of opening them, though, because right now I'm supposed to be talking about this. Just do me the great favor of opening them while I am on, Julia's Presses channel. Well, as I expected, the books have arrived. I ordered about 50 books, so I would have books to sign and send out as pre-orders and as autograph copies.
Great.
And if anyone wants an autograph copy, hint, hint, I'm willing to autograph any copy that people buy. If anyone figures they're a friend of mine and are entitled to a free copy, we can talk about that. I would say anyone seeing this video, probably the easiest way would be to send their name, address, and other contact info through you, and then I could reach them and get them to the ordering link, or you could just post the ordering link.
I will definitely post the
ordering link. And if you mention the ordering link, as I recall, includes a space for notes. If people put the word autograph in that area, I will see it and I can autograph. If not, not. Anyone who's a friend and knows me of old, of course, can call me after the video. Well, as I was saying, we saw in Canada with the investigative report by the Toronto Star in 2013 that, in other words, college freshmen, including those who had been taught cursive, are literally unable to read at age 18 things that they may actually have written when they were age 8. It is possible to forget how to write a script, just as it is, believe it or not, possible to forget how to read if you go from a literate environment into an illiterate environment. You, as a publisher, by the way, might want to talk about the phenomenon known in some emerging nations as lapsed literacy, not just now, but throughout history. In other words, there are people who've had primary school, but then they had to leave school and they went off and they were, shepherds or road builders or something. And by the next time they ever saw anything in writing, they literally had forgotten how to read it.
That's interesting, but usually
it's off topic. We don't think about it, and we don't think that just as this can happen with regard to printed text, and hardly anyone in developed nations ever thinks of it, even though it happened to at least one 18th century poet, and we can do an episode on that later. It can happen to handwriting. If you Google or search on Bing for something like "forgot how to read cursive," you will find at least as many self-reports or descriptions of a family member or employee as you would find if you searched "cannot read cursive," and you would find millions either way. Now, I'm convinced that this happens for several reasons, both the issue of someone who never got the hang of reading cursive in the first place and someone who forgot. But before I get to that, I want to point out that anyone who was a first-year college student in 2013, well, now it's 2021. It's 8 years later. These people would be 26 years old. They would be in jobs. They might have families. If they're at work, some of the work they might be at might be as a teacher. And by the way, speaking of teachers, I have heard reports of kids having forgotten to read cursive because of basically a year with little or no schooling. Again, you don't have practice. And you might wonder, well, why did people not forget how to read cursive like, in the 1950s or the 1850s? Well, you saw it constantly. If you lived before the mid 1980s, you saw people write by hand constantly. Even if it wasn't cursive, there was some similarity of forms. You saw over and over letters written, in the act of being written, not just completed as type fonts presented to your eyes. Even though I had huge difficulty reading cursive, which is another story, I can tell you that I would have had more difficulty, I think, if I hadn't grown up seeing my mom writing lots of letters by hand every week, whether they were invitations to a party or letters to the bank or the electric company or letters to my school. At least I would get a sense that the motion didn't just start in a random place, that you followed a specific sequence. These days, if I was a kid, my mom would probably be doing all these things by email or text message if she wasn't, just phoning. So I have to say, to some extent, we can blame not reading cursive or forgetting how, let alone forgetting how to write it. Not that I'm a fan of cursive, but we can blame the inability to read it on the internet. And again, I am not a fan of joining all your letters. I am not a fan of having letters disagree with printing, because there's actually research that the fastest and most legible writers do basically a semi-joined printing rather than conventional cursive. We can get into this at another time. But however we write, or even if we don't write by hand at all, we want to read things that are written in cursive. They could be book covers, they could be store signs, they could be, well, what if one day you found a package of letters and it was your grandma's love letters to your grandpa when they were dating? Suppose you knew what it was. Suppose she told you, if you couldn't figure out what it was, wouldn't you want to read that? And you probably would not want to take it to some archivist at a museum to translate for you, although they would gladly take the job for a nice fee. Do you really want them looking at, who knows what could be in there? And of course, we probably want to read the founding documents of our nation, which are in the USA and in many other nations, handwritten documents. And certainly these things are on the net, but do you really want, but you really want to trust that? If you don't read cursive, how do you know that what's on the net is really what was actually written? Someone could come along and change it. We have had people, not to get into politics, but in the USA, as in other countries, there have been people who gladly would have wanted to represent this country to our citizens as being a monarchy. I can think of certain recent individuals, without naming names, who would have jumped at the chance to be able to show people a document they couldn't read and say, it says right here, I'm your king. I can think of that. And in fact, that prospect was thought of years ago. I don't know if anyone out there is a classic Star Trek fan. Maybe you are. Do you remember a Star Trek episode called Omega Glory?
Yes,
Omega
I
Glory?
remember the Omega Glory.
Yeah. And for those who do not remember this very chilling episode, we see a society that is very much like a future version of the USA, but it was conquered years ago by an enemy army. The descendants of the former citizens of the USA are living a nomadic, illiterate lifestyle. They have chiefs, but the last chief who could actually read, died many centuries ago. And one of the tribes of these nomads has preserved an ancient sacred relic, which turns out to be the handwritten Constitution of the United States. But the thing is, he doesn't know how to read, so he can't read it. All he has is a tradition that was passed down from his ancestors, that the first few words say something that sounds possibly like E playa mista, which turns out is, someone tried to sound out at some point, we, the people of the United States. But this is all he has. And, even at the end of the episode, when he's been told what this was, and he's been told something of the lost history of his people, and Captain Kirk, before zooming off into space, makes him promise to live by the words of this ancient document and to teach them to all his people. Well, just how is he going to do that? Now, I would not want us to fall into that situation. And what I would certainly not want is not to be able to read all the unofficial things that have been written by historically important people. You know, presidents and congressmen have private lives too, and so do the people who work for them. You recently mentioned to me that there actually is a letter out there written in cursive by Aaron Burr's housekeeper, a freed, formerly enslaved person who wrote about how Aaron Burr had made sure that she got an education. And it would be a pity not to be able to read that if I saw it one day, you know, whether I saw it in the National Archives or wherever it might be, or whether someone hadn't known what it was and used it to wrap leftovers in. It would be a pity if nobody could read it. Now, I'm convinced that the reason we don't know how to read, that so many of us either don't know how to read cursive or frankly forget or never get the hang of it, is not just lack of practice in today's culture, which is understandable given what a tangled and peculiar system conventional North American cursive really is, but also the fact that when we are taught it, we are normally taught in a way that just goes by rote, that does not show you. In other words, you know, why is a given letter a capital G or a capital J, or, you know, a lowercase q or a capital R? And I would like to give two examples. I'd like to give an example from your first name, which starts with a J. And I'd like to give an example from my last name, which starts from a G, because these are two of the letters I happen to be asked about. Now I'm trying to figure out how to
I can give you a whiteboard. Is that what you would like?
perfect. A whiteboard would be perfect. I've forgotten that Zoom allows a whiteboard, and I actually was sitting here. Now I hope you won't mind. I will have to go. I have to go and make sure that I can charge my phone, because while you put up the whiteboard, I'm going to take the opportunity to charge my phone, because I see that my phone is at a quarter charge and I would hate to give up. I've been having my phone up basically all day, you know, double checking addresses and looking at zip plus fours. So I think the right thing to do is just to charge my phone before the poor thing is just gasping for electricity.
Oh,
So
that's just fine.
yeah,
So
so
we
anyway,
do
we
have the
a
whiteboard.
I'm okay now. I'm looking to see where the controls are. I recall last time I had some difficulty. Here are the controls, pen. So let's say I write a letter. I'm trying to write. Okay, so if I write a letter, oh God, so I'm sorry. My screen has just. I was in the middle of. Every time I'm writing this, it stops. I'm going to have to make the. I'm trying to see the screen. Okay, now, but every time I write this, I'm losing the pen. Okay, I'm going to have to. Okay, I hate to do this, but I want to make sure the pen works. So let's say you probably learned at a young age that this is a J, and at a slightly older age, you learned that this is a J, this thing that to my mind always looked like nothing so much as a crippled termite. And you wonder what would be the relationship. Well, very simple. We have a J. Think of starting it at the top, which was an older practice. This is a J. This is a J, similar to John Hancock's J. This is a J. And if you look at them, all of them have that same structure in them, down and to the left. So let's say I'm trying to see how to, so may I erase that now? In other words, once you see what makes them all the J, what is their shared basis or skeleton, you will not forget again, which is the J. You will not be inclined to reverse it and end up with a lowercase f, which is a
the
whole.
part at the top, you know, that was sort of
Yes.
like this, seems to have gone like that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, if you think of the part at the top being more flourished, for instance, this is one Renaissance J, but to us it looks like nothing so much as a cursive T. There, but if you look at it, you can actually see that the top of the J actually was at one point the starting point, but became a flourish, became a sort of wind up stroke. And then we had, a lead out stroke. So you ended up with a wind up and you ended up with a gracious. What is, I don't know. I lost. Okay, there is my whiteboard. Now I would like to erase my whiteboard.
Okay,
And since,
okay.
by the way, people say a lot of odd things about cursive. They say, oh, nothing reverses in cursive. You won't have reversals. You won't have dyslexia. Well, this is not actually so, because let us look at the cursive,
Go back to
cursive.
normal.
I'm trying to get my pen to work. It's not working. Let us look at the cursive J and let us look at the cursive F. And I was reversing them all the time. And I know many
Reverses,
others who
yeah.
were.
They
But let
always
us
reverse. Yeah.
but let us go on, if we may. G is certainly a puzzle, and maybe we can do another couple of letters. If you have that this is a G and this is a G, and you wonder, how do you tell the G from the S, which is also, they all look unrelated, but look, G, 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 G. You can actually see the relationship happen.
Very good.
Similarly with S, this was one version of S, this was another. We could have this. In other words, you still have the shape in there. Now, of course, the one that people ask about all the time is Q. Literally everywhere I go, I get asked. I get asked about a lot of them. I get asked about Q. We have a lot of, I'm trying to erase this and it's not, is there a way that you can clear the whiteboard from your end? Because my eraser is
Okay,
literally not
okay.
working. And I would like to do capital Q. And then if we have any comments, if people think of one other letter, and the reason I'm showing you this is not just to give you a mini history lesson before I begin, but with Q, but because this is one of the techniques that is used in Read Cursive Fast to make cursive make sense. Now, let me see. Now, I would like to sing for you a song that I sing for my students, which is not in the book because I do reserve it for live performances. And you'll see, and it seemed only natural that if I was going to write about Q, I was going to invoke the band Queen. So, buddy, you sit and you stare at Q and you wonder, why would it look like two? Well, if done in one stroke, you could start it from the base and still end up in the very same place. And we will warp Q, because centuries ago, when they wouldn't stoop so low, halfway up and around they'd go, then a curlicue there and a curlicue here, and the two-shaped Q will soon appear, and that's how cursive warped Q. I do actually have a version of this on my own YouTube channel, if you would post the link.
I will.
Probably,
I will.
it's been popular enough that sometime this week I may get it on my website, which is due for an update anyway.
Very good. I
We've
love
had
it.
some glitches on the website, but let's take this out. Now, does anyone have any other, letters, curiosities, comments, questions that they would like covered? Because if not, I'd like to tell you the first part of Read Cursive Fast is mainly explanations of this sort with sentences that are built out of letters. At a certain point, you've learned a certain number of letters, and we have sentences with them, and we have words and phrases, so you can practice your decipherment skills. And don't worry, there is an answer key. Then the second section of the book has what I call cursive stories. And what a cursive story is simply a story that's written with each sentence in a different font, successively a different font, so that the first sentence is in the very plain print-like font.
Should I take us out of the whiteboard now?
Yeah, why don't you take us out of the whiteboard? I forgot we were still on to whiteboard. I'm trying now, if you could tell me, I seem to have lost the ability to switch the camera around, and I'm trying to make that happen, because I would like very much to show you
Well,
something.
if you take a picture of it and send it to Julia, perhaps she could share it.
Well, I will actually take a picture of one story from the book, which is a cursive story, which I like to call them, which is actually called The Man and the Cat. So if you will excuse me, I will take a screenshot of
Okay.
this and you'll see exactly how this works. And yes, we even have, although I won't show you, on the page after the story is questions. Comprehension questions, which again are also done in the same manner of successively different fonts. And I'm afraid you'll get my hand in the screen because I have to hold the book open. Okay, I did this, and now let's see if I can get into Messenger and send it into the group chat,
Okay.
That
and
would be
then
good.
you could post it.
Yeah, then I
Okay.
can.
And for those who are not interested in trying to decode cursive, well, you might want to save this for others. Once you get it up, I will actually read you the story. Although obviously this is a book, this is without recordings, but I think you might enjoy the story.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's the first story in the cursive story section. This way you can read along and see what I did. Okay, want to post the photo if you could?
Oh, yeah. I'm gonna go ahead.
Julia's working on it.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
I have to disable sharing on
Yeah,
my end, so I have
Oh,
to be.
Yeah, because this is a story from the second of three sections of the book. The third section is, by the way, historical documents, and we'll be going through this. But I thought I would like
I
to
think I
give.
enabled you.
Okay, good.
Okay, let's see if we can have this. I chose that this story fits neatly on one page, so I chose this. We have more complicated stories. There's actually three stories in there. We wanted to save space, but once you're okay, now if you can scroll down, I will be reading this. Okay, story number one, The Man and the Cat. Do you think you can enlarge the screen to show more? Once there was a man who hated cats. So he decided to get rid of his wife's cat, Missy Whiskers. He left Missy Whiskers in the city park and drove back home.
Aw.
When he got home, Missy Whiskers was walking up the driveway. The next day, he drove to a park in the next town. He put Missy Whiskers up a tree and drove quickly home. When he arrived home, there was Missy Whiskers sleeping on the front doorstep. Finally, he decided to drive all the way to a park in the next state. There he found a lake with a big rock in the middle of it. He picked up Missy Whiskers, waded out to the rock, and left her there. Then he began driving home. A few hours later, he phoned his wife and asked her, "Honey, is Missy Whiskers home?" She answered, "Yes. Why do you ask?" He explained, "I'm lost. I need her to give me directions."
Cute.
Well, we have two other stories. I've tried to make them interesting and inspirational, but I don't want to give away too much of the book. At the moment, I'm in the process of arranging for the Amazon page to have look inside the book, because the book became, shall we say, unavailable shortly after it was put onto Amazon. It should very soon be available again, and I want a look inside to be there. My publisher is trying to make sure that we have a good supply chain for the book for those who do order from Amazon. So much for the second half of the book. Now, the third half of the book has historical documents, just a few of them. We have the Declaration of Independence, for instance, but before we get to that point, we actually have a couple of samples from kids in early America a couple of hundred years ago who had written things in their textbooks. Basically things to tell who was the owner and to ask that if you borrowed this book, bring it back quickly. I don't want to go into photos of this because they've been discussed in a video on your other channel. And of course, I would like people to read the book and see for themselves what smart alecky kids were writing, 200 years ago and more in there. textbooks. And at the very end of the book, we have a little perk for everyone who makes his or her way through the book. There is actually an award certificate, which you can award yourself if you are able to read that certificate, because it's written in cursive and it's written to include at least every lowercase letter. So if you can read that and someone who knows cursive agrees that you've read it correctly, you are entitled to put your own name on, which doesn't have to be in cursive. It can be, you know, any way you would write your name. Remember, legally, your signature is what you write whenever you intend to write your signature. People who told you signatures need to be in cursive are not correctly informed, as any attorney will tell you. But knowing this, you can write your name any way you want to make that certificate your own once you've proven that you've earned it. And yes, we do have appendixes. So we have answer keys and all kinds of fun stuff. You don't have to guess if you've read one of the exercises correctly, because anything that is not self-explanatory, there will be a key for.
Okay, very good. So thank you so much, Kate, for sharing all of that with us. We will have ordering information and other links in the description once this goes live. And I hope that all of our viewers will want to get themselves and possibly a friend a copy of your book.
Yeah, I think it would have a lot of, I feel like people that are learning to read could actually, adults could benefit from
Yes,
Kate's book too.
they
That's
are
what I
one
think.
of the target markets: adults who are having basic education, people who are learning English as a second language, people of any age who either have literally forgotten how to read cursive or who never learned, or in the case of kids, why not give them a book to teach them how to read cursive before you teach them how to write it? If
Very
you
good.
want them to, because one thing I always tell people is that cursive is the only primary school subject where if you give the third grader or the second grader a book on that subject, the student cannot read the book that he or she is supposed to use, or at least cannot read all of it. You know, I'm not a math person, but I could certainly read a math book if it was handed to me and I was supposed to learn from it. I was not, you know, a fan of history, not at the time, but if you gave me a history book, I could read it. But if the same teacher who gave me the math book and the history book gave me the cursive book, I could, you know, laboriously copy the designs I saw there, but that didn't mean I was reading them.
Yeah, you know, even with math books,
Mhm.
at a certain point, it goes into Greek letters that the student may not
Yeah,
have read before, may not
right.
know how to write. So
Yes,
even
but
there,
even in the math book, these are explained. The better ones may show you how to write them, or these days you can go on the internet and, you know, learn how to write anything. There are charts with arrows and numbers and so on. The point is, a math book will explain it. Cursive books, if I may make a weak pun, only as a rule give a very cursory explanation. You know, they may
yes.
show you the word apple in print and then in cursive, and then say, and now you can read this. And
Okay.
it
Well,
doesn't always work. Well, we have to go. I do want to
yes.
give people a chance
Yeah. Well,
to.
my boss, I don't know if you can hear him, but my boss is a chimpanzee and he said,
Well, let's see. If the chimpanzee is able to read cursive, that will be a very interesting show indeed.
yes, I will definitely share it with you. And we are working on his cursive.
Oh, really? That is going to be a broadcast first.
Okay, very good. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for joining us, Kate, and we look
Thank
forward to
you.
another show.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Will
Bye
do.
bye.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah.